He said, Joe, emergency came up in town, have to go. Take the horses to the Hall Road. I'll pick you up there. See you later, and goodbye.
Okay, so this is mid-September,
That's late
20th,
September. It's getting down to zero. It's getting down to zero at night,
okay.
And about 20 during the day.
Okay, and you have how many head of horse?
You have like 4 horses and 3 mules.
Okay, and you get this blase note of like, hey, by the way, you've got to go how many miles back to where
200.
Exactly.
Right.
200 miles.
200 miles, and there's snow on the ground. No GPSs, no satellite phones. I'd never been that way before. It's so cold at night, and the ice fog was coming down at night. You couldn't see anything, and I thought, well, they can't look for us. And this, I just hadn't realized that I'd been duped at this point. I thought people actually might care enough to come look for us.
This is borderline murder.
Right. But in the end of the day, we ended up with all the horses died of hypothermia. We were totally unprepared for what we were doing. I looked out over this vast expanse of open ground, and he looked out there, and I didn't see any roads. I didn't see anything. And I thought right then and there, and then that's when my heart sank. And I was like, man, we are done.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Wilderness Attitude Podcast. This is your host, Brandon, and I just have to tell you that we just had a great half-hour conversation with Joe, and we're going to get to it, but I totally forgot to hit the record button, and this has never happened to me before, but I don't mind sharing with you, the listener, that, things happen, right? But I have an amazing guest with me from Alaska Wilderness Enterprises. He is a master guide and outfitter, Joe Letarte, and the last 30 minutes was incredible, and we're going to do our best to re-record this and give it to you. But I have to tell you that I met Joe through Santino, a mutual friend, and he won a Doll sheep hunt here last year at the Western Hunt Expo, and that he's going to go on with Joe this year. And he came to me and said, I have had the opportunity to sit down with Joe and talk to him, and he is the real deal, man. Like, this guy has lived and breathed Alaska. He put it all on the line to get there, to be a guide with his wife and kids, and his story is epic and an adventure and unfathomable in my mind. But I got to share it with you, so we're just going to dive right in. Joe, I'm really sorry for what just happened.
That's okay.
So, Joe, I asked you the question about Master Guide, right? Your Master Guide number 121, and you told me that it really used to mean something. Please tell me again in brief description about that, because I really got to get to the story. I mean, you had me on the edge for a half hour. So.
All right. Well, the Master Guide designation was really a badge of honor years ago. And it still is to a certain point, but the requirements have changed. So when I was doing it, when I received mine, you had to have no violations, no complaints for 15 years, and you had to have recommendations from 10 to 15 clients saying that you operated by the law and that you were trustworthy and a good guy, and you did a good job. So when you think about the layers and layers of Alaska regulations and the game rules up there, and then the 26 different units that have all different rules in them,
they're all different.
They're all different, and it's really tough, and it's really tough for people to go up there without even getting some kind of a paperwork violation. And they're not serious violations. I'm not saying you couldn't you had to be a felon or something, but you just couldn't have any violations at all. And then with our hunt contracts and the things we have to fill out for the state as a guide, you couldn't have anything really a violation there either. So 15 years without any of that. And then good recommendations. That's a milestone. We were always really proud of that.
Yeah.
Really proud of
that. And I asked you before, you didn't really have an answer, but out of those 120 prior or before you, I was really curious, like how many are alive still or how many still guide. And but I would have to say, even you said that they're up in the 170s, 180s, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I'd have to actually check on that. But, the people from 1 to about 79 probably are no longer guiding or alive, So there's not very many master guides in Alaska. There's quite a few registered guides, and there's a lot of assistant guides. So that's kind of the way it breaks down,
Right.
But, the master guide thing is definitely the minority of the whole thing.
And so you have been a master guide for how long?
I got my master's guides license in about 1989. No, 1990. 89, 93.
93.
Yeah, about 93. And so I was pretty young still, you know, when I got that. And then I was even more proud of that, you know, because I got into the guiding really young. I was about 21, 22 years old when I got my first assistant license, you know, so, and I stuck with it ever since then. And so, you know, I kind of made it into the master guide designation at a young age, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you met your wife, Vicki, and you guys were from back in the Midwest.
Back in the Midwest. So, yeah, I was, you know, typical little Midwest town, you know, in northern Illinois. Spent the summers in Wisconsin vacationing, the whole, you know, kind of stereotypical Midwest white picket fence life, you know. My dad was an Episcopal minister. My mom was a school teacher. Went to church every Sunday. Everything was closed on Sundays, you know, except for the drugstore to go get ice cream and, you know, the whole thing.
That's
you
cool.
know.
At least they get ice cream.
And so it was really great, you know. It was great growing up in that kind of atmosphere, you know. And, you know, Vicki was a little bit older than me, so she'd gone away and gone to college and been married and come back. And I met her at church, and she had 2 kids, Kimberly and Ryan, and really thought a lot of everybody. And we were friends really before we got married for quite a while, you know, and knew her from church and just started hanging out with her. My brother played Santa Claus for the kids, and we were just friends with the family, you know.
Right.
And so it was really great, you know. It was great. It was a great intro into, you know, ending up marrying somebody that was a friend first, you know.
Right.
So, yeah, it was great. And she just decided, you know, that she was an outdoor person, too, and we spent a lot of time. We'd go out to Colorado together and, you know, hunt antiques and hike and, you know, go to the Teton Wilderness. And she was just like, this is what we got to do, you know. And so we kind of thought about maybe moving to Colorado first. And we were out there, and I remember we were out there in the Big Thompson Canyon right after the flood, you know, the flood that wiped it out.
Yeah.
And there was a Mexican restaurant there called the Devil's Gulch Stage Stop. And it was probably some of the best Mexican food I'd ever had.
Still this day, probably.
I don't know. I wonder if it's still there.
I don't know.
And we were having a beer, and some guy was like, you know, well, you know, this is nice here, but, you know, if you really want to do it, you really got to go to Alaska, you know. And so we decided kind of right there.
Challenge
She's like,
accepted,
yeah, let's go up there, you know. And so, you know, she had $50. I had $50. She gave me her $50. I hitchhiked
$50.
$50. And so I hitchhiked out to Seattle. I didn't spend any money going out there. And the plan was for me to catch the commercial fishing fleet and work on a fishing boat, you know, for the season and make some good money. And back then, a lot of college kids actually did that. You know, a lot of college kids went and got jobs on fishing boats to pay for their college, you know.
But that was what you needed to be, young and strapping.
Yeah,
and,
right.
You know, and tough.
And I guess I didn't really look into it well enough because when I got there, all the boats had gone. I missed them by about a week, you know.
Not just a couple of days, but a whole week.
And so there I was. I was on the port of Seattle. I was on the pier there, and they were gone. And I needed to get to Alaska. I mean, I couldn't go back. You know, I didn't want to go back in failure. You know,
go back with your head
hung
low and be like, we
right.
have nada.
Yeah, you know, and. So somebody said, well, there's a ferry down there at Pier 49, and it goes to Alaska. And so I went down there, and then it was one of the state ferries. I didn't even know Alaska had a state ferry system, you know. And I went in there, and they're like, yeah, we go to Haines, and we go here. And I'm like, well, I'll go to Haines. You know, that's Alaska, and then I'll just work from there. So I spent most of my money doing that. I had a little money left over, and I went down. There's a little market along the pier there. And I went down and I bought as many sardines and crackers as I could afford, and that was all I had. That was it. So I had a backpack, some sardines and crackers.
How long is this trip on the ferry?
I think back then it was 5 days, you know. Huh. And so I slept on the deck of the ferry and ate sardines and crackers and, you know, just kind of bided my time. And I met a guy that was a river rafting guide from Salmon, Idaho, and he actually gave me my first job. I think he felt sorry for me. So when we got up to Haines, Alaska, he was going to be running people down the Tetchenchini River to the Elsek River. And lo and behold, that's where I actually have one of my guide areas now for brown bear. You know, today.
Right.
And so back then, if I never would have imagined, you know, dropping the first people off on the Tetchenchini River, that someday I would have a guide area at the end of that river. I mean, I just never would have imagined that. You know.
He didn't even dream it.
Didn't even dream it. I mean, that was just so far out there, you know.
Yeah.
And I made enough money with him that I could get to Anchorage. Got to Anchorage and went down to the Homer Spit. And, you know, today the Homer Spit's a pretty big tourist destination. it's kind of glittered up a little bit. But back then, it was like a working place, I mean, you either worked in the fish cannery or you were a mechanic on a boat or you were a commercial fisherman. There really wasn't that much tourism. Yeah. And so I got a job in the fish cannery down there, cutting heads off, sliming fish, doing the whole thing, living on the beach in a tent, Back then, the equipment wasn't anything like it was now. I vividly remember my backpack was made out of canvas,
And they just let you live on the beach?
Yeah, just let you live on the beach.
No rules to that.
Yeah, and then the big thing was to go down. There were like 2 or 3 halibut charters, and they wouldn't save the heads back then, and so they'd throw the heads into the trash, and we'd go get them out and cut the cheeks out, and then we'd eat those. So we lived on that,
Yeah. So you get up there and you get the opportunity to get some money. You get to Anchorage, and then from Anchorage,
we got to Anchorage, and I decided, I saw a job for a wrangler up on the Brooks Range, but I was out of Fairbanks, so I had to get to Fairbanks. Back then, I mean, distance, I didn't really pay attention to distance for some reason. And I didn't realize that Fairbanks was 440 miles from Anchorage, And so I saw this ad for this Wrangler, and I said, well, I can do that. I handled horses, and everything, and I can do that. And so I went up there and got the job, and we trailed the horses up the back then it was just called the Haul Road.
Right.
And so they were still building the Alaska pipeline. Even though the oil started to flow through the pipeline in 1977, everything was still being built all the way up to about 1981. And so the road, I remember the first time we went up the Dalton Highway, or what we call the Haul Road, now is called the Dalton Highway. The surface hadn't been hardened, and we had to have a state of Alaska grader hook onto our horse vehicle in the trailer and drag us up through the mud up over some of the hills because you couldn't get traction,
Wow.
Yeah, and so it was totally in its infancy. There was no public access. There was no public access to up to Prudhoe Bay.
Right.
And we had one of the first commercial use permits to go up there. Because we had the guiding operation. We're hauling the horses up there, and I'm sure it was one of the first. I'm sure it was probably the first or one of the first 2 commercial use permits ever issued to drive up that road.
Yeah.
And so and it was a long road. I mean, you got to remember it's 400 miles from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay, and we were going to Pump Station 3, which is about 90 miles outside of Prudhoe Bay, and you had all these really steep hills and valleys and everything, and they still hadn't completed the bridge across the Yukon River. And they had the hovercraft off to the side where you drove onto this hovercraft and it hovercraft you across.
No
and
kidding.
Then you drive off, yeah.
This is like modern day pioneering, just without wagons, right? But just with tires with air.
Right.
Rubber
and
tire.
then the construction camps for all the people, all the different companies that had a different part in building the pipeline. They had to put up these huge villages for each one.
Camp.
Yeah,
deals.
and so each construction camp had a laundry, a bakery, a restaurant. Game facilities, relaxation TVs, shower houses, and it all had to be put up and used while they were building the pipeline. And then today, if you go back to those spots, there's not a trace of them left, nothing. They were all built on top of the ground.
Totally reclamated.
Totally reclamated. It was really amazing. If you were up there back then, and they were little cities, fresh baked goods 24 hours a day, lobster, steak for dinner, fixing your trucks, fixing tires, but only for the oil workers, not for us.
Yeah.
For the companies.
Right.
Because when they worked on that pipeline, they were working on it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
It was going all the time.
Yeah.
So it was really, really an amazing engineering feat to see all that on the way up there.
Now you'd mentioned when we were talking before that you were cruising up that way, and that there was one spot where a non-oil worker civilian could get a hamburger. And what was that guy's name?
Yeah, so for those of you that know Iditarod, there's a lot of people that do know the Iditarod history. Dick Mackey was one of the first winners of the Iditarod sled dog race, and it's probably one of the most famous finishes where he was racing, I think it was Swenson, neck and neck into Nome, and Mackey got off his sled and ran with his dogs across the finish line to lighten the sled up to win the Iditarod. It was one of the most famous finishes of all time. He was a real deal.
Super
he was
cool.
cool.
I got to look that up and watch that.
It was cool.
Is there any film of this?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure they filmed it. But anyways, he had where he trained his dogs was outside of Wiseman there, and he had a little 10-acre parcel there, and the haul road ran right by it. And he had a couple of trailers there, and he set up like a grill, and he was serving hamburgers. And so you get a hamburger and a bag of chips and a Coke. And I remember my wife and I, the first hamburger Coke we got there, it was like $73. I mean, it was unbelievable for a hamburger, a bag of chips, and a Coke. But I mean, it was what it was.
Like we called it earlier, highway robbery. Right?
Yeah, but it was classic. And if you went to Coldfoot today, it is the huge restaurant, huge hotel facilities. It can sleep probably 200 tourists. It's got a huge gas station, tire shop. But when I was there, it was a mud, absolute square in the hole in the middle of the trees, a mud pit with some trailers there, and that was it, And you were doggone happy to be there because that was the only civilization.
That
and Wiseman across the road,
Yeah.
Wiseman was a historic gold mining town that's still there. Beautiful little community, beautiful people live there. So it was really great. And you got a picture there, their interpretation of all this. So you're living in Wiseman in the middle of the Brooks Range, no outside influence, nobody coming in and out of there ever, And one day, and I remember one of the girls telling me when she was a little girl, one day I heard this like noise, and it was the bulldozers coming, and it got closer and closer, and all of a sudden their world went from totally isolated subsistence living to connected to Fairbanks and trucks and people and pipe and drill rigs coming. You know what I mean?
I can't imagine what that was like.
I mean,
right?
the total transformation in like literally days. Their whole lives were just changed just like that.
I wonder how that's accepted. I mean, I'm sure the older people were like, like always, right? They don't want to change, whatever. But I bet the kids just sat there on the side of that thing, just going.
Well, they were probably thinking, well, now we can go to Fairbanks, or now we can go get our groceries.
Well, imagine they've never seen any of this stuff
in
their life either.
Right, exactly.
That's crazy.
So it was crazy. So we got up to Pump Station 3, and we had to spend, 2 or 3 weeks there resting the horses up before we rode. We were riding 200 miles into camp, and we were riding into a place called Timber Lake, and the guy that owned that camp in there was a guy named Colonel Witt. He was retired, Eugene Witt, and he was one of Patton's blood and guts guys. So he went into D-Day behind Patton's tanks as an infantry commander, and so he mopped up behind the tanks as they went in, liberating Europe all the way to Germany, So that he was for real. I mean, he had some really good stories, and he was an inspiration to me. At the time, and even to this day, he wrote a little book that I have, and I look at it once in a while. And the guy had seen the worst of life, and he knew what the cost of freedom was firsthand, for sure. And
then he found this place to go escape.
Right.
All this in the Brooks Range and guide people.
Right. And he would tell me, he says, you can never lose your will to survive. He goes, because when you lose your will to survive, then you're dead. You're dead on your feet. And he said a lot of the enemy soldiers that came upon had been fighting for so long and had been bombarded for so long. They were alive, but they were just standing there, unwilling, unable to. Zombies.
Yeah.
And he says you can never get that way. You have to keep moving forward. And it was really an inspiration to me. He's a great guy. Yeah.
I just can't even imagine meeting somebody like that.
Yeah, and he still had
epic period.
He still had the photo of Patton that Patton gave a picture of himself with inscriptions on it to all the commanders before D-Day, and it was like for the glory of the country or something written on there. It was really great, and he still had that. And he had it up in camp the whole time he was there. So
wow.
Yeah, it was really, really clever.
So you make it up there, and then you kind of get set up. Now, did you build a small cabin there?
No, we didn't. We never lived in the Brooks Range. I just worked up there.
Just where you were.
And then I decided that Fairbanks was the place to be, and more down toward the Yukon River area, and. So we actually homesteaded a parcel of land up out of central Alaska, 40 acres, and back then it was the old homestead system, and so it was go at noon on whatever day they said go, and you run out in the woods and you basically had a backpack. I had a backpack on with chainsaw gas and oil in it, and I had one of those little meters to tell you how many feet you were going, and we just kind of decided, where we knew kind of where we wanted the 40 acres to be, but to get the corners square and everything, I used that little meter and I tied it off to a tree, and we just started walking. You had to stake your corners, brush your lines, flag it, and then you had to get back to the land office to file on it,
Right.
And so we were doing that, but I was trying to do it all at once. So I had the meter, and I was using the chainsaw to cut the limbs as I went, and she was hanging the ribbons and brushing it as she went. So we were doing it all at one time. And, somebody came across our line and like, basically get out of here. This is ours. And it's like, they drew a gun on us. It got kind of tense. I mean, it was the real deal.
What?
And that same family later on in that homesteading period got in a fight with another family and ended up shooting it out up in Central. And it was a pretty well-known shootout. And they killed 2 people and wounded a couple more. And I mean, it was like people took it real seriously.
And did anything happen to them? I mean, was this
Oh,
still
yeah.
the Wild Wild West?
It was
where
the
you
Wild
just do
Wild
whatever
West.
you want?
And
But
so
this was only in the early 80s.
This is the early 80s, but that was very early history for Alaska. You got to remember, statehood was just 59. So 59, 69, 70, and they were only 20 years into being a state.
Yeah, but man,
then,
in the early 80s, man, you couldn't pull that stuff off down the lower.
Then they had another homesteading opening down by Denali Park a couple years later, and the same thing happened. Some people got hurt. So then the state did away with the old homesteading, the race, and they went to a lottery system where you draw, and you only had so many people go in there, and you're guaranteed land and everything. And so that's the way it went from that. So, but it was really something to live through those days, to do that, and then have to race back to town and file on it, and do the whole thing.
How old were you when this happened?
I was probably 22, 23 years old.
Man, 22, 23-years-olds don't think like
Yeah.
that anymore.
I built my first house at 24. So, built the whole thing
built
myself.
that log cabin
Yeah.
you were telling me, right?
It was 50 feet long by 25 feet wide. And
it cost you
$48,000 to build.
That's crazy. That's just in the early 80s.
Yeah, that's in the early 80s. So then I got my first assistant guide license, and I guided in the Brooks Range for a couple years. And I left Colonel Witt's camp, and I went with another guy. And he turned out to be kind of a crooked deal. It was kind of a not a great guy.
Right.
And he bought some horses, and he said that they were from British Columbia, and he said that they were all climatized, because you got to have horses that are climatized, to live in. It can potentially be at the end of season up there 30 below zero.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had some people up, and the season went well. But I noticed the horses were getting run down toward the end of the season, and he's flying in more and more grain for them and trying to keep them bulked up. I kind of thought something might be up, but he guaranteed me that they were fine. So then it came time to leave, and we'd actually stayed in later. There was a outdoor writer by the names of James Wooters, and he used to be Peterson's hunting magazine's whitetail guy. He was the guy that wrote tons of whitetail articles back in the 80s.
Right.
And he came up on a muzzleloading moose hunt, but he wanted to stay later. And so, it's really not a great idea to stay in the Brooks Range past about September 15th, 20th, because it really gets cold fast,
Right.
And so we were up there, and it was almost the end of September. And he got his moose and everything, and then the guy I was working for said, well, let's all meet at this one lake, and the float plane will come, and they'll fly everybody out. And then he said, you and I, meaning me and him, and another wrangler, will ride all the horses out, And so I got down there that day with Wooters and the moose and the other wrangler, and Paul said, he said, I forgot something in one of the camps. Take all the horses, because I don't want to have to deal with them here. Just go back and get the stuff and come back. And when I left, about half hour down the trail, I heard the plane coming and going. And it came and went a lot. I'm like, God, I didn't think it was coming that early, blah, blah. When I got back up there 3 or 4 hours later, there was just a note. Everybody's gone. And there was a note in the ground with it on it, and it said, hey, it said, Joe, emergency came up in town, have to go. Take the horses to the Hall Road. I'll pick you up there. See you later. And goodbye. That was it.
So let's wrap our minds around this real quick. Okay, so this is mid-September,
That's late
20th,
September. It's getting down to zero. It's getting down to zero at night, and about 20 during the day.
Okay, and you have how many head of horse?
We have eight.
You have
eight. We have 4 horses and 3 mules.
Okay, and you get this plase note of hey, by the way, you've got to go how many miles back to where
200.
Exactly.
Right.
200 miles.
200 miles, and there's snow on the ground. No GPSs, no satellite phones. I'd never been that way before. It was a whole new way because we were in a different camp. And good luck, And so I didn't have any choice. I was either going to sit there for the rest of the winter or take off. And so we, the other wrangler and I said, we just got to go. We got to go and give it a try, And so we take off. And, first day out is okay. Second day, it really started to snow. Snow starts to build up. We had pretty good snow, and we had about 2 or 3 feet on the ground by the time that was over. A long story short, the horses weren't climatized. It was getting down to, at night, it was getting down to 30 below, and during the day it was about 10 below to 0, for the high, and the wind was kind of blowing kind of hard.
Yeah, and
we're on the north, we're close to the north slope. I mean, we're just on the south side of the north slope,
Right.
Of the Brooks Range.
It's its own.
It's its own
weather system.
We're in the Arctic, basically.
Exactly.
And so the horses started to die. They died of hypothermia. We started camping on them, trying to save them, doing all this stuff. But in the end of the day, we ended up with all the horses died of hypothermia. We didn't have adequate footwear. We were hiking, and we wore hip boots up there that year. A lot of the guys just wore hip boots up there, so we just had hip boots on, had a backpack, had a tent. That's it, So we were totally unprepared for what we were doing. Really no insulated footwear. And so all the horses died. We're there by ourselves. Are we going to camp on them and eat them? Or are we going to go? It's so cold at night, and the ice fog was coming down at night. You couldn't see anything. And I thought, well, they can't look for us. And this, I just hadn't realized that I'd been duped at this point. I thought people actually might care enough to come look for us.
This is borderline murder.
Right.
In my opinion. I'm just sitting here with my mouth wide open listening to the story thinking that there's some serious problems with this whole gig.
Right. So we decided to walk, and we started walking.
Because you have nothing left.
Nothing
the
left.
Horses are dead.
Horses are dead. Mules are dead. I got a little piece of moose meat about 6 inches in diameter. I had a big bag of rice, and that's what saved us. I had a .22 pistol. That's what saved us. We were shooting ptarmigan, and I remember we came down to one of the rivers, and, of course, they were all frozen over. It wasn't very thick, and I busted through the ice, and I saw some fish in a pool, and we got those and ate them, But the kid I was with, he was younger than I was, and he was really kind of freaking out, and I don't know why I was, and I should have been, but I felt fairly comfortable with the situation in a way because I thought we were really going to make it out. The gravity of the situation wasn't sinking into me for some reason.
Did you block it out on purpose?
I think I might have.
You're right.
But he didn't. He started to lose it, and he was crying a lot, and he ended up running into one of the rivers just because he got so fed up. Because every time we came to a river, I said, we got to take our time. We got to make sure the ice doesn't break. We got to throw rocks out there, see if it's going to break. We got to do this.
Yeah.
And he got soaking wet one day and just lost it. And I remember
that could be the death of you.
That could be the death of you. So I had to spend a whole day getting him dried out, making a fire, doing it all. And it was really a deal, And it came down to the very end, and I was looking at the map. But you got to remember, we went over about 5 mountain passes, and to tell where the mountain passes after it snowed is really hard. I mean, you're looking at the Brooks Range. You're looking at this whole mountain range.
The same as you've ever seen it.
And one of the passes at the end, it was waist-deep snow, and we were kind of walking up through it, taking our time, trying to go slower and slower, so we wouldn't wear ourselves out.
Right.
And I saw some tracks up there, and I thought there was another guy to the north of us, and he had mules. And the tracks looked big enough in the snow, and you could tell where something had been dragging its belly. And I thought maybe it was the other guy that had come, because he would come from upriver and use that same pass.
Gotcha.
And so we hurried up there. Well, it was the bear tracks, and the bear had been dragging its belly. Even better. So the bear was on the other side, And so now we got the bear running at us, and we're shooting at it, trying to scare it away. And, just things like that just every day were unnerving you, and every day challenging you, and every day, I started to think at that point, this might not be too cool, because maybe we have the wrong passes. Maybe we aren't on the right rivers. But we finished it out, and we got down to a point where I told him, I said, tomorrow, we should be about 5 miles from the haul road. If we get up on that ridge, that ridge is this ridge on the map, and we're going to get up, we're going to see the haul road, it's going to be over, blah, blah. And we got up there the next day, and yet the hip boots would freeze at night because they were wet from our sweat. And so you had to stand them up at night and make them round so they'd freeze that way so you could get them on in the morning.
Put them on.
If you laid them down and they went flat, you were done. You had nothing to wear then,
Yeah.
You'd have to thaw them out. So we got up on the ridge, and I'll never forget it. I looked out over this vast expanse of open ground, and he looked out there, and I didn't see any roads. I didn't see anything. And I thought right then and there, then that's when my heart sank. And I was like, man, we are done. Because somehow we have taken the wrong river, the wrong pass. We're on the north slope somewhere, but I have no idea where we are. No one's going to be looking for us, because if they were, they would have been here like yesterday, today, because the ice fog had lifted. Yeah. And I thought, we are in serious trouble now. And I remember thinking, I saw some moose a couple miles back. We should go back and shoot one of those and make our camp on that or whatever. Right. And he started crying. And he's like, yeah, we're done, and I just didn't know what to do at that point because I was getting, at that point, pretty physically and emotionally spent, trying to keep him going, trying to keep the guarantees up, And then I took my binoculars, and I was just looking one last time, and I saw a little dot way out on the flats. It looked like it was moving, and I started watching it, and it was moving. And what it was it had snowed the night before, so the haul road had been snowed over. I was looking kind of the wrong way for the haul road. It was really more straight out from where we were, and I saw that truck coming. And when I realized it was a truck, I just grabbed him, and I'm like,
let's go.
That's it.
Let's go,
that's
man.
it.
Holy
we're out of
cow.
here. And so down we went,
I mean, so that quickly you're like at the point of like it's done.
Yeah.
And then,
and that's really,
truck,
that's really
man.
where I knew from that trip walking out of there and toward the end looking up at like some of the peaks and seeing the snow swirl off the top and, the wind blowing by us and just the vastness and just the fact that maybe I'm not going to make it out of this. Maybe this is the end of me. And it's at moments like that you know exactly what you're going to do the rest of your life, I was going to get married. I was going to devote myself to this. I was going to be a guide. I was going to stay. I wasn't
on my knees.
Yeah,
every
I wasn't
day.
going to let the country beat me. Yeah, you know what I mean. I mean everything in my life that had kind of prepared me for this moment. This was the deciding moment in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
It was big.
Now, that story is unbelievable. I mean, there should be a movie. There should be a book. There should be everything about that. I mean, because now maybe that happened a lot back then, but
yeah, I don't think so.
But maybe it
Actually,
didn't. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I mean, in that kind of country, I could see that it's more possible than anywhere else, right?
Right.
But that story is amazing. That is a thrill ride to even listen to. But now, as you're telling this story, I'm on the edge of my seat, but I'm at the same time I'm getting upset. Because I'm thinking of this guy that left you out there, and the first thoughts in my mind is yeah, I'm going to change my life. But it's going to be right after I go down and whoop somebody's ass.
Right. So, but I still at that point hadn't realized that he did it on purpose. So I was thinking this must have been some kind of a mistake. I had no proof. So we got down to the haul road, and we had to cross one last river. It was the Sagamactuck River, runs along the haul road. Got across that, shinnied across it, got up on the haul road, and a truck came by, a pickup truck, and he stopped and he goes, what are you guys doing up here? And we're like, we had some horses, and he goes, I remember you from last fall. He goes, I think the guy is here to pick you up, but he's down at one of the camps. He says, there's a semi coming behind me. He said he'd pick you up. And so we got on the semi, and he drove us down to the camp, and the guy that was there to pick us up, the guy I was working for, he was like, oh, my gosh, thank God you made it. I was so worried about you. What happened? Don't worry about the horses, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't until 10 years later, back in Fairbanks, when I got a new neighbor, and the neighbor looked kind of familiar, and I was talking to him. And I'm like, where do I know you from? And he's like, I was the pilot that flew your boss out in the Brooks Range. He says, I always wonder what happened to you. He says, because I never heard about you again. And he says, when I took off with that guy, I said, what about Joe and Eddie? And the guy said, don't worry about it. They're never going to make it, And it was at that moment that I realized that he had left us there. And then it became real clear that he knew, talking to other people about the situation, he had known that those horses obviously weren't climatized. He didn't want to get animal cruelty charges pressed against him, so he just left us out there.
As an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, accident waiting to happen, and then it would just be like we'd never make it, and it would all be washed over. So, I mean, that was my first experience with truly devious, cold-blooded, murderer-type people.
That's insane. And so how do you take that information and process that without being, scalded in your heart and your soul and having, all of these thoughts? I mean, how do you...
Well, by that time, the guy was long gone. He went on to be kind of sought out by the law. He obviously did a lot of other things. He had warrants out for his arrest. So by the time I realized what was going on, he was long gone. And, you just got to realize that, there are a lot of bad people in the world. There's a lot of evil in the world, but the's a lot of good people in the world too. You got to focus on the good.
Yeah, you do. And I mean, that's just insane to me. That. Well, I'm glad you're standing here, man.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Could have been the end of it.
That's insane. So I mean, then you get back home, you get married, you raise kids.
to raise kids.
And you know, and from there, I'm sure
living the Alaska dream.
Living the Alaska
Go
dream.
through the guide licenses. Went from assistant guide to registered guide. Started my own business. You know, on the kitchen table with a couple pieces of paper. You know, fought the government for permits to guide. You know, I tried to go through the changes Alaska was feeling. You know, it was changing from a real working state, outdoor state, to more of a, you know, citified, people work for the government now, not that many people on the land. You know, back then everybody was on the land, you know. You were either a trapper, oil worker, mechanic, something. You know, now most people up in Fairbanks anyway, the majority of people work for the federal government, you know. So just the whole attitude, the whole lifestyle. And we were always, I think I've always been one of the few guides that actually, I've never done anything else. You know, I mean, we were full-time guides. I had a few odd jobs here and there, but I mean, overall, you know, it wasn't like I had a job with the BLM, and then I used my vacation to guide. We were full into it.
You've always done.
Yeah,
this
always
is
done it.
Through and through, who you are.
Who we are, hunting guiding, fishing guiding, and then for a while I actually did trapline trips where I took people on trapline trips and stuff. Right. And so I mean, we've always been full in on the whole thing, you know. And my wife worked with me through the whole thing, and it was great.
So now, after that, living through that, do you now do you have fear of anything?
Oh yeah.
Maybe you still have respect of things, but do you see? I mean,
yeah. I mean, Alaska's a good place to. You got to respect everything in Alaska because it's a good place to get killed. It really is. You know, I mean, there's just so many variables up there that you've got to. Every time you look at whatever you're doing, whether it's flying, crossing a river, riding a four-wheeler, you know, what is it in this situation that's going to be my enemy? Because most of the places you are, there is no help. You know, you are the help. That's it. Especially places that we operate, there is no help. You know.
Well, in that vast country, I mean, so then you established some state land. You got some river land that you get to hunt.
Yeah,
coastal,
so I
right?
got a state concession. I got 2 federal concessions. I had to fight for everything we've gotten. You know, I mean, obviously, after the pipeline and everything was over, then the Fish and Wildlife Service came in and they, you know, it took over a lot of land. National Park Service came in. 1980, you know, Carter made the ANILCA, the, you know, Native Settlement Act, and it locked off a lot of land. So things started to really change. For the first time, you had a lot of people that were like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you know. Whereas before, you could do whatever you wanted on any land, you know. So we lived through all the changes there, you know, and started guiding, you know. And I went back to my roots where I was from in the Midwest, started advertising. I think people identified me because I was from there, and most of my clients for the first 15 years were pretty much from the Midwest, you know, and we had a great thing going, and it was a lot of fun, you know, very rewarding.
Well, still to this day, it's rewarding.
Very
or you
rewarding.
Wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing it. No, it's gotten great all the way through, and like I say, you know, we've had so many friends and you know, close friends that we've made over the years nationwide. I can go to any part of the country. I always have a place to stay. I always have what I consider a really close friend. You know, my wife was a godparent to some of our clients' kids, and some of the people, the kids we hired, 18, 19-year-old kids to be packers, and made them into assistant guides. They lived at my house. You know, several of them lived there for years. You know, they came from maybe not that great a background and came up, and my wife always was willing to help people like that, and you know, took them under her wing, fed them, worked them hard, and you know, a lot of them had said, you know, you've been more parents to me than my real parents, you know, or
right.
I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you. And several of them live around me right now where I live in Two Rivers, Alaska, and there's total success stories. They have great jobs. They're pilots. You know, they just a home run. It's very rewarding to know you had a part in that, you know.
Sounds to me like God delivered you that day in order for you to make impacts in people's lives, right?
Yeah, that's what I try to do. From all the way from the hunting to my employees, I try to change people's lives. You know, I try to help people all the way along.
Well, I hope that this story that you told us inspires people to have a greater understanding, you know, in whatever way this speaks through to them, right? I mean, there's, you know, thousands and thousands of people can take this in a thousand different ways.
Right.
Listen to your story, listen between the lines, and understanding, you know, that wasn't that long ago. I mean, that's the thing that just keeps blowing my mind. You talk about some of these dates, and I'm like, I was 12 And I had no idea that this even existed, that was even possible. It was even happening in the world, right? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, at 12, what's your length of perception really, in the world?
I mean, a lot of the animals we encountered in the Brooks Range back then, had never seen people. You got to remember, there was no bridge across the Yukon River until the late 1970s. 1980s when it was completed. I think.
So did they still run from you back then, or did they just look at you like, what?
The bears would run right at you to see what you were. I can remember shooting sheep that didn't even move. We basically walked up the side of a mountain, and they were all just looking at us, and we'd shoot the one we want and walk away.
They hadn't even registered yet.
Unbelievable. They'd never seen a person before.
Right.
Yeah, it was really, really a unique situation,
I mean, just thinking about the amount of changes that you've seen happen in that state, from $100 bill
right
to where you are today, and
from a dream at the Devil's Gulch stage stop, and the Big Thompson Canyon in Colorado, and we went back there and got our wedding rings there. So that's where the whole thing kind of started. And we got our wedding rings there, and it was really
Where'd you get married at?
We got married in our hometown in Illinois. Got married in the chapel my folks were married in. The whole traditional Midwest thing.
Full circle.
And we took off, and her mom was crying because she didn't want to go to Alaska and chasing after the car and everything.
So what did your wife think? I mean, how long were you gone in this period of time where you went up the first time, and then but then. Okay, so the first time you went up into the Brooks Range, you came back, got her, built a house. Then you just leave seasonally to do your guide stuff, right?
Yeah, so, she was living in Alaska, and, we were apart for months at a time, I mean, there was times in the beginning where I'd be in the field for 240 days a year. I mean, I was living in a tent. We couldn't afford to have a bush plane bringing me back and forth all the time,
Right.
But in the beginning of our business then, she was with me all the time, and she'd be in the field with me 240 days a year, and the kids would be there,
And the kids,
too. The kids would be there, and so.
So what do your kids do now?
They got away from Alaska. They didn't like the cold,
Yeah.
And the boy's actually a SWAT officer in Miami, Florida, and the girl's a school teacher in Georgia, so.
Followed grandma's path of being a school teacher, huh?
Yeah, right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But how cool? I mean, you've got. I mean, one, you became, and you didn't even touch on this, but you became a father of children that weren't yours,
right?
And took that. I mean, when you left,
everything I've done has been a challenge. If you've ever been a step parent, it's the hardest job in the world. You're the throwaway parent at times. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, you really got to stick with it,
Mm-hmm.
But I was determined to do it. I was determined to devote myself to them. I didn't have kids of my own, and we have a really great relationship to this day, and I wouldn't change anything for the world,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have 9 kids. Mine, yours, ours, and theirs. 2 adopted, so I know all about the step-parent gig, but we don't even use that terminology in my house. None of my kids are step or half or adopted.
Right.
They are brothers, sisters. It's mom and his dad.
Well, I consider these kids my kids, so.
Yeah, and so you fostered a ton of kids, right, so to speak, right?
Yeah, a lot.
I had a friend on yesterday that told me that, Alaska's kind of the land of the misfits. Did you think you were a misfit when you went there?
Yeah, a little bit, because we didn't fit into the, where we came from. There was quite a bit of money there, and people had aspirations of make all the money you can. That's the only thing that's going to bring happiness. Get a Mercedes. If you're not vacationing in Europe or the Riviera or having spring break in Mexico, you're a total loser. And we just knew there was more to life than that. So we wanted to get back to kind of basics and just be a family unit and enjoy each other and kind of live a truer life. So that's what motivated us. But I think Alaska to this day, they call it the end of the roaders. People that have nowhere else to go, and it does attract a lot of people like that. But there's a lot of good people too.
Oh, I'm very fortunate that in my position, I've only met what I feel as the best people of Alaska.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't met anybody yet that isn't super transparent, honest, gritty, intelligent, passionate, outdoorsmen. I mean, it's almost like a prerequisite that if you live in Alaska year-round, you better be an outdoorsman, and you better have some grit to you.
Absolutely.
And you better have it together enough to where,
it's hard for people. Yeah, it's hard for people to understand because, I remember vividly. I grew up, and most of us grow up in an area in places where you constantly have some kind of noise, traffic noise. Your house makes noises, the clocks. You hear a dog barking down the street or a train going by. And I'll never forget the first time I was truly left alone for 3 weeks in the Brooks Range by myself, nobody around, and that's another moment you have to accept as, is this going to work for me? Because until you've actually been totally by yourself, you don't know the feeling of it. I mean, it's really weird at first.
It is weird. I mean, I mean, there's some people they can't go 3-4 days,
right?
And they're freaking out,
right? Or just go somewhere into the woods and wherever you live in Colorado or Idaho, and go out there for 24 hours and just be totally away from somebody, and then see if you can do that for weeks. And if you can't do that, Alaska's not the place for you.
So that's an easy self-test to figure out if you're going to go or not. Huh? Well, I tell you what. I mean, what a crazy story. I'm blown away. I'm still trying to process some of this and understand how you made it out.
I mean,
I've got all this happens.
I went on to guide. I mean, I've guided myself hundreds of bear hunts and 160 sheep hunts, and where it was just me and her. I was doing all the guiding, she was doing the cooking, she was doing the books, and so I mean, for years, I've done this, and I don't think there's really too many guides around that can say they can have personally guided. I've guided over 200 black bear hunts. I mean, that's a lot of hunts, over the years, that. You couldn't possibly do that much if you're just doing it on a vacation or a few weeks a year. But when you're doing it full time, when it's your livelihood, it adds up.
Right.
So that leads to our experience today at Alaska Wilderness Enterprises.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. Now, so do you donate a hunt every year?
Yeah, I'm really believe heavily in helping other causes and donating things and making other people's lives better. So I donate quite a few hunts being 3 every year. And I've really been committed to this outfit here, the Western Hunt Expo. They've been very good to me. Their cause is great. The money they raise here for wildlife conservation is phenomenal. I couldn't come here and not be a part of that. And so I donate 2 sheep hunts a year here, one for the barrel raffle up in the front of the building, and then one for the Full Curl Society, And it's great, and we've done that for quite a few years. And I've donated other hunts here as well for the auctions. And so it's just something I think that everybody, as a hunting community, we really all should be doing that.
Yeah.
We need to all take part in making this legacy go on and on and on,
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the animals, right?
Right.
It's all about them, and and you do that for them. And it's amazing in the last few years I've been here to meet the people that donate the hunts for the Western Hunt show or for Wounded Warriors Outdoors or things like that. And I mean, and not every guide does that. That is not the commonplace thing to do, I don't think.
Yeah,
right? It's not.
Unfortunately, it's not.
It's not. And so I commend you. I'm proud of you for making that something that is in your heart.
Right.
And that you're that passionate and that driven. And there's no reason why I can't understand why you wouldn't be. I mean, from the stories you tell me and who you are and listening to you talk and the way you treat people and the way the whole package that you are, it makes sense to me. And so I say thank you. Thank you very much for what you do, because you're continuing something that I haven't gotten to yet in my hunting career, but somewhere that I plan to go.
Yeah.
And so, it's through the things that you guys are doing, that you generous outfitters are doing, that keeps that alive for me and possibly my children as well. And so I appreciate that.
Right. Well, I really appreciate that. It means a lot, you saying that.
And you kept Vicky on your pamphlet, and I think that's super honorable. Like you said, it was always a team effort.
Oh, it was a team effort.
And I think it's amazing that you still can, that you still honor her in that way.
Yeah, so she just passed away a year ago last October, and it was pretty traumatic. It was totally unexpected. I came back from a trip, and I found her deceased in front of our house. And so at that point, I thought the Alaska journey was over. I mean, it was a nightmare. I mean, I don't wish that moment on anybody in their life, And I thought the Alaska journey was over, and then after some time went by, and I realized I'm never going to get over it. I realized that I'm only going to learn to live with it, losing her, because I'd been with her so long, and we were such an entity, and such soulmates that very few people really find that kind of relationship, and I'm never going to find it again, and I just cherish it, And so I know she wouldn't want me to quit, and I decided, well, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to let this beat me. Goes back to the everything that we went through. Goes back to the Timberlake, the guy making it through World War II, and never giving up, saying to me, "You can never let down." And I'm actually going to honor her in a way by starting a nonprofit for her and donating some money through things we donate through that to Wounded Warriors, keeping her name on the business. She's always going to be a part of the business all the way through. So that's just my plan.
It's awesome,
Joe. Makes me feel close to her too.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I think that's awesome. I hope that if I'm learning so much here and hoping that I could be a quarter of the man that you are. I mean, hearing your stories and all this and her, I'm telling you, I mean, you're the real deal, man. You're the real deal.
Yeah. Well, it was tough in a lot of ways, and the kids. It was tough on the kids. It was tough on me at times, real tough. But I think the rewards at the end of the day for the kids, for her, for me, the rewards of doing it, being up there, the whole experience, I think it made everybody better people all the way around.
You wouldn't change a thing, would you?
Wouldn't change a thing.
Joe, thank you so much for being on here. I'm sorry that I didn't hit record in the first place.
That's
but
okay.
I'll tell you what.
Well, thanks for having me. It was really great.
It's awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a extremely passionate story that we got from Joe, and I hope that you took the time to resonate through that and maybe even listen to it again, because there's a lot to take in this 50 minutes. And I'll tell you, if you're looking for anywhere to go in Alaska, look no further than Alaska Wilderness Enterprises. I mean, if you're not compelled to hunt beside this man for your brown bear, your coastal bear, your black bear, your Dall sheep, your mountain goat, then you're missing out, right? I mean, you're missing out, people.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
This.
We'll do everything we can. We treat everybody's tag like it's our own. We'll do everything to make it successful for you and enjoyable. And I think that's evident that people that I've guided, almost 40 years ago still have good memories of their hunts.
I mean, even at this point, Joe, I mean, if I went up there and hunted, I wouldn't even care if I got something, if I just got to hang out with you for another week or 10 days and hear more stories and sit around the fire and drink some coffee or maybe a sip of whiskey and get to, I could soak that up big time.
Come up anytime you want.
I'm planning on
right.
it. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much. We appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate your reviews. We appreciate your emails. Thanks so much for what's going on. If you haven't had a chance to come to the Western Hunt here in Salt Lake City, please make it a part of your plans. Get out here next year. Get out here, book a hunt with Joe. Come out and see the people at Wilderness Athlete. I mean, it doesn't matter where you stop. Any booth you stop here, stop and talk to people, because it's an amazing community. So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.